Hi everybody, Dewey the Duelist back at it again with some Genesys content. The Genesys format in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is less than a year old and the deck building theory is still being developed. The short version for those of you still learning Genesys is that every card in the game is legal, except for Pendulum and Link monsters, but more powerful cards carry point values, anywhere from 1 to 100, and the max number of points in your main deck, extra deck, and side deck combined can only be 100 max. In other words, if you put in one 100-point card, very powerful, you won't have any room for anything else. That being said, most of the cards in the game are 0 points. Otherwise, it is the same game you know and love, but without an extra monster zone, or pendulum zones, obviously, because those were introduced alongside the not allowed in Genesys, Link, and Pendulum monsters, respectively. So, you might assume, as I did, that everything on the Forbidden and Limited list in the TCG has a point value of 100, functionally limiting it to 1 copy in your Genesys deck. But I have done some research for me and for this budding Genesys community, and there are actually quite a few cards that can be played at higher copy counts in Genesys than they can be in the TCG, including cards that are forbidden in the TCG that can be played at full playsets of 3 in Genesys. So in today's video, we're going to cover the following. First, we'll talk about TCG Forbidden cards that you can comfortably play at 1, 2, or even 3 copies in your Genesys deck. Then we'll quickly talk about TCG semi-limited cards that you could play at 3 copies instead of 2. And then we'll talk about TCG limited cards that you could play at 2 or 3 copies in Genesys instead of just 1, like you can in the TCG. And often you can do that with points to spare. In each section, I'll highlight the cards that you probably want to focus on, the archetypes that I think can take advantage of them, and then the cards that I think you can mostly just ignore. For example, cards that just don't function without Pendulum or Link monsters. I've included the links to each of these lists that I just showed you in the description of this video, so you can go card by card rather than hear my 2 cents or try to pause the video at the right time. And then timestamps are in the description as well to help you find what you actually care about. So if you found this helpful, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But without further ado, let's dive in. All right, let's start with the naughty list. So these are cards that are forbidden in the TCG that we can play in Genesys. I've included here anything that's less than 90 points because some archetypes have few engine associated points and could realistically play or sometimes even search the cards you see here. I'm looking specifically at Smoke Grenade and Infernoble. So I'll begin with what's most exciting, and then I'll tell you what you can probably ignore. So first things first, let's look at Mind Master. Banned in the TCG, it is 1 point in Genesys. Not once per turn, lets you summon out a whole bunch of psychic monsters for the low cost of 800 life points. Note that 1 for 1 is also recently cheaper, so you can use that to summon this out. And things like Ash Blossom and Imperm are far less prevalent in Genesys because of their point costs. So I'm going to show you this clip that is on the screen. If you get this in any of your low-level punk monsters on the field, you can cycle through all of them, search a monster, search a spell, search a trap, and then fuse with Shrakasai. This helps if any of your punk pushes get stopped. You can just keep on keeping on, though you should keep an eye on your life points. Next up is Original Sinful Spoils. It is banned in the TCG, but you could play a playset of 3 for 51 points in Genesys. Though I'll be honest, it's probably better to spend the 6 extra points and play 2 copies of Black Witch instead of copies 2 and 3 of Original Sinful Spoils. This is especially useful for things like Snake Eye Lyrilusk, Snake Eye Mimighoul, Fire King, Rescue Ace, Jurak, anything that has a level 1 fire monster that you would like to hit the field. Next, let's talk about one of my favorites, Cyberstein. It has many amazing targets that are all, unfortunately, 100 points in Genesys, like Naturia Exterio. But if you just need to cheat out a fusion monster, think about it. I'm going to show you a couple fun things that you can do. So you can summon this out of the deck with Gigantic Sprite because it is a level 2 monster, and although you will be 2-locked by Gigantic Sprite, you could then summon Hugin the Runic Wings to search Runic Fountain. This is useful in a Runic Sprite Melfi build. Notice this is the only way to summon Hugin in Genesys because there's no extra monster zone and you can't use the quick plays to just summon Hugin to the Yinzi. And then if you do this, you can overlay Hugin and Cyberstein for Melfi's of the Forest, so she's not in attack position anymore. Then you search Wally, and you should be happy. Just protect your life points, because you'll have 3,000 left. Max C. worth including for a similar reason. You can summon out of the deck with Gigantic, use Herald of Pure Light to put it back in your hand. Note it's also searchable off of Retaliating Sea, which is only 5 points. If you're playing like an insect deck, you can just search Max Sea as part of your combo. Okay, Pot of Greed. You can play 3. How fun is that? It's not much more to say. It's like an iconic card for a reason. There's been a lot of retrains for a reason. Card of Safe Return. This is really exciting. So this card, not once per turn, every time you summon a monster from the graveyard, you can draw a card. It can miss timing though, so watch out, because it's a when effect. But this is potentially incredible in things like Pump King, Mayakashi, Dark World, Furnace Sylph Naturia, Fabled Fiendsmith. I'm sure you can think of others. Let me know in the comments. So here's I'm showing you a clip where it can draw more than Pot of Greed, and quite a bit more. Cool. Next up is Dimension Fusion. This is not actually a fusion spell, but because of the way that it is named, it can be searched as if it were by things like Winged Karibo, Sabatiel, which is forthcoming, Primitive, or Darlingtonia Cobra. It's more like a soul charge for the banish pile, but for both players. It is a potentially incredible finisher for something like Metaphys or even Weather Painter if you have a million little banish guys. Later on, I'll show you a Metaphys list I've been toying around with that includes Dimension Fusion. I'll also link that in the description. One thing you will notice here, sort of across the board, is that extra deck monsters tend to be pretty expensive, so you'll have to do the calculus of whether or not it's worth it to include, but note that they are more accessible because they're in the extra deck. There are certain things that are back on the menu in Genesys that are off the menu in the TCG. You'll see that Kit Kalos can be played at only 50 points. King of the Feral Imps is also here, banned in the TCG. You can use Herald of the Arclight to search, or you can use it to Omni-negate and floodgate your opponent by banishing their stuff. Dark Matter Dragon, which I'd actually never heard of before, you can use to Foolish 3 dragon monsters, and then you can use Chaos Ruler for mills. That's pretty neat. Saber Invoker is good for any strategy where you just need to get a level 4 Earth Warrior or Beast Warrior onto the field, like Argo Stars, for example, or MX itself, or Zodiac. And then Broad Bowl you can use in any deck that just needs to search a Beast Warrior very badly. I've seen people doing that in Radiant Typhoon, which is fascinating. And then there are the cards that you can largely ignore, which is most of the things that we haven't talked about here. And I would put those in a few buckets. There are cards that literally don't function without Link or Pendulum monsters, and those don't exist in Genesys, so problem. Example, Borreload Savage Dragon. It needs to equip a Link monster to have any negates. Can't do that. Starving Venom. You need Pendulum monsters to fusion summon it or contact fuse it. So there's really no way to get it out because it has to be fusion summoned or contact fused. I'd also put Spiral Master Plan in this category because I honestly don't know how you'd get her off the field, on the field or off the field without the Spiral Link too. And then the Tempest Magician FTK, I looked it up. It really doesn't work without all the Pendulum cards that generate spell counters. If you can find a way, be my guest, but I don't think it really works. And then same thing with the Amaryllis FTK. I'm pretty sure that needed Topologic Bomber Dragon to keep destroying it and then burning your opponent. And you just needed like 10 plants in grave or something. Block Dragon, again. This is hard to get on the field. It's easy to get on the field, hard to get off the field to trigger its search effect. So it's not nearly as good as it is when Link monsters exist. And then sort of adjacent to that is cards that aren't that good because their main function is summoning tokens, which you can't just link off in Genesys because there are no links. That's things like Dandelion, Grinder Golem, Galaxy Tomahawk. I guess you could play Grinder Golem in Makonko, but honestly just play a Kaiju. And then finally, there are some cards that have just aged poorly. They're just too slow now. Mirage of Nightmare is one of them. You used to like activate it and then get rid of it before it was your next turn. So you could draw 4 during your opponent's standby phase. But if you want to draw 4 in your opponent's standby phase, just play poorly. Ultimate Offering. It's slow. Like, what are you going to do with extra normal summons on your opponent's turn? With Rabina at 33 points, it's not like you're going to be normal summoning flu monsters. Return from a Different Dimension. I mean, there's a spell version of this. You should just do that. Fiber Jar. It's a flip monster. I don't know what to tell you. I think it's also probably part of some FTKs that you cannot do because of the way the points are distributed in Genesis. And then Victory Dragon is a funny one here because it has 0 points and it is banned in the TCG. And I looked it up. I was like, is it legal in Genesis tournaments? It is, but I think it's because the community has figured out that Victory Dragon literally just doesn't work, because if you are looking at a Victory Dragon that's about to attack you for game and take 2 games at once, you just concede the game and then move on to the next game. So remember, you heard it here first. Okay, and then there are cards that are effectively nerfed because other cards have points. So Bahamut Shark, you'll see here, has 81 points. Well, guess how many points Totally Awesome has, which is its best summon target? 20, so you cannot play both. Butterfly Dagger Elma is fine at 1 point because the cards required to FTK with it are all at 100. That's Royal Magical Library, for those keeping score at home. That could draw your whole deck if you equipped the dagger to Gearfried the Iron Knight, and then you could just win by Exodia because you could draw every card in your deck. And then Dark Eradicator Warlock, you could burn your opponent to death by just doing the same thing with Butterfly Dagger Elma, activating it over and over again and burning your opponent 8 times, and then they would die. Can't do it because he's 100. And then there's things like Branded Expulsion, which alone, aren't prohibitively expensive, but when you look at the rest of the cards in their archetype that also have points, like, it's effectively really hard to play. And then finally, I would sort of group the rest of the things we didn't talk about as cards that are non-archetypal and also unsearchable. So it makes them very hard to include in your deck. Though I will say, if you want a card bad enough, there are a lot of generic search cards that have been released since most of these cards were printed. There's things like Small World, which can get pretty much any monster in the game. Seventh Tachyon, Piri-Reis Map, Where Art Thou, Ties of the Brethren are also cards that reach big chunks of monsters, so it's worth Googling the card to see if it has any searchers, because you'd be surprised. And then there's things like Triple Tactics Thrust, Left Arm Offering, Pharaonic Advent, Lady Labyrinth. Those can all get you 2 spells or traps. It's rare that a card is truly unfindable if you are creative enough. All right, next let's move on to semi-limited cards. All right, so semi-limited cards. We only really care about semi-limited cards where you could play a full playset of 3 in Genesis, otherwise it's just the same as the TCG. So they'll need a point value of 33 or less to allow for 3. It's a pretty small universe, as you can see. So before you get too excited, Lucaeus might not have any points, but his friend Draco Tail 5 mana is 30 per copy, Ketu's 15, and Rahu's 10. Falls in the bucket of archetypes that are pointed heavily enough to have it be hard. Ryziel and Pearly, similar issue, whether the TCG semi-limits get lighter treatment in Genesis, other cards in their archetype carry point values, so you still will have to make some trade-offs. For example, both the Ryziel Xyzes are 20 points pop, and X to the best starter is 25. And then Pearly has to pay 10 points per white cat, 5 points per black cat, and a whopping 33 for Noir, which is usually the win condition. Unchained has no points anywhere, but that's because its 4 and soon to be 6 archetypal link monsters can't be played in Genesis. Same thing for Malice. No points anywhere because all of the effects to summon back from the banished zone link lock you, and you cannot link summon. Probably the most impactful cards here are Runic Fountain at 3, since you can't search it like you normally would by using a Runic Quick Play to summon Hugin to the extra monster zone, who would then search it, because, again, no extra monster zone. I really wish they would just let us have that in Genesis, but whatever. And then there's Droll and Lockbird. You could play it at 3 for the cost of 60 points, and it is one of the most powerful turn enders, so if you don't have a lot of points to spend elsewhere, it's not crazy to consider playing 3 of this, which you cannot do in the TCG. All right, and now let's move on to limited cards. Okay, moving over to the limited card pool, this is where I think some of the most interesting opportunities live. Everything you see here is limited to 1 in the TCG, but can be played at 2 or potentially 3 copies in Genesis. So there's a few interesting clusters of cards here. There are cards that can carry or significantly shape games. So in that category, I would put Slash Draw, which can mill a whole bunch of cards at once. And if you get lucky and your opponent has 4 cards on the field that can be destroyed, and you draw Slash Draw, you just win because you burn them for 8,000. Here is what that looks like. It's very funny. And then Shifter. Probably one of the most unforgivable point values anywhere in Genesis right now. It only costs 30 points for a playset, and entire decks are built around it, and it completely shuts down a lot of decks. It's miserable. Personally, not a Shifter fan. I didn't even play it in Fluanderies. One Day of Peace is a draw and stall tool that is very hard to interact with because it's lingering damage prevention. And again, Ash isn't really in the format, so it's not like you're going to Ash it. Oh, Mathmech Circular. This is one of the more infuriating card designs and a great example of power creep. Low risk, high reward, combo starter. And it can get you into a lot of different things. It is interesting because you have to be a little bit more creative because you can't just do like standard Cyber's link spam like you might normally. And then we have Psi Frame Gear Gamma. It is both negation and can remove a body from your opponent's field, which often takes them by surprise and can really ruin combos, and sometimes end turns. It can also insulate combos when you're going first if you are starting with a spell or trap effect, and you do not have a monster on the field. I will say also both Called By and Crossout are 20 points apiece. So if you want just more defensive firepower to insulate your combos, there you go. And then That Grass is Greener. You can only play a max of 2 copies here, but I will just warn you, it will be hard to find it because you're probably going to want to play it in a 60-card deck. So unless you're like blinding second against a combo deck and you just hope they have a bunch of cards less in their deck by the time they're done, it's challenging. What you're probably better off doing is playing 1 copy and then some number of Thrust, which is only 13 points, or Left Arm Offering, which is 7 points. I will say, you probably haven't lived until you have sent 20 cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard with 1 card, and that card is this card. Okay, the next bucket of cards I would say are combo starters or combo enablers. Metamorphosis is a great example of this in something like Fairy Tail. It turns any of their bodies into full combo. Really awesome card for them, and so cheap at 3 points. And then we have things like 1-for-1. That really shines in things like Lyrilusk, Mimigul, Snake Eye, Fire King, Rescue Ace, largely the same universe as original Sinful Spoils. Anything that revolves around rank 1s or a level 1 that is a play starter. Synchro Overtake, I'm not sure of the full universe of this. I know that like junk decks can use it. In the TCG it's used by Cool Tune, but Cool Tune is so heavily pointed that it's really hard to play in Genesys. So if you have a favorite synchro strategy that requires a specifically named synchro monster, use Synchro Overtake. Oh, Brilliant Fusion. You can put this in your deck and pretend like it's the good old days, where you get to send a light and a brick from your deck, and then you can get an extra normal off of Seraph Knight. Foolish Burial is a great card for any number of decks who start their combos by sending a specific card to the graveyard. Gold Sarcophagus is the same thing, but if you need to banish something to start a combo, I use this in one of my pet decks, Turbo Banish Metaphys. I'll show you a quick clip to show something silly that you can do. Of course, I have stacked my deck for this example to show like best case scenario, which is Necroface, hit Necroface, hit Necroface, because it's not once per turn. But there's been a lot of interesting cards that have been released that actually interact with being banished, so you can build a fun little pile around that if you'd like. And then we also have a bucket of cards that are semi-generic searchers. I would put Chaos Space in that category, Bonfire, Reinforcement of the Army, Terraforming. And on the most recent Genesys update list, a lot of these actually got less points. So that's really exciting. And then there's also a surprising number of draw cards in here. Sekka's Light is at 3, and that's super interesting because you can build your deck around it if you want. Funnily enough, you can play it in things like Weather Painter, because you place your continuous spell traps, you don't activate them, and they stay on the field because they're continuous, so they'll never be in the graveyard to conflict with Sekka. And then they grant effects to your monsters, but they do not themselves activate. Food for thought. We'll think about that one. And then, along with One Day of Peace that we talked about earlier, you can also draw 1 card at a time with many copies of Chicken Game, Into the Void, Card Destruction, Card of Demise. The latter 2 get you more than 1 at a time. And as you can see in this clip that I am showing you now, that can get out of hand very quickly. And then there's Pot of Prosperity. It's a little expensive, but that's another way to shape your hand, but it doesn't play super nice with the draw spells because if you have drawn at all, you can't use it, and then you can't draw after you use it either. And then the final bucket of interest here are cards that I would call just like generic extenders. So there's Premature Burial, which is an equip for decks that care about equips. And then Monster Reborn. You can also play at 3, should you so desire to do that in like your raw deck. And then, like the other sections, I think there are some things here that we can just fully ignore. You'll see at the bottom, Exodia pieces, you could play at 3 copies. I don't see a world in which you ever play more than 1 copy of any individual Exodia piece. But hey, you could max out on like Charmies and the new Ray's Moonstarter Squeeze and like Shared Ride, and then just try to draw a playset of 3 on turn 0 or on your opponent's first turn. Good luck. And then there's a whole bunch of other cards that don't really work without link monsters. So the Yummy cards, Malice cards, Sky Striker, Hornet Drones, Fiendsmith, kind of. And then there's individual cards whose archetypes still have an overall high point value, which we talked about earlier. I'd put Tyr in that category, Bestials, K9, Vanquish Soul, Ryziel, Gimmick Puppet, Zodiac, Tenpai, Branded. A lot of archetypes have gotten a very heavy-handed treatment, which I think is welcome. I will say one archetypal exception here is Radiant Typhoon, because you could play 3 Chant in Genesis instead of 1, like you can in the TCG. And the rest of the Radiant Typhoon cards are not pointed that heavily, so Crocea lovers, rejoice. And then you could probably also ignore cards where the point values are close to 50. Like, yes, you could play 2 copies of Chainburn or Monster Gate or Reasoning, but why? And why is Obedience Schooled 40 points when the only reason it was ever limited at all was because of Yummy? Like, please, just let Melfi have it, I beg you. We can be trusted. Finally, it's probably also safe to ignore cards where 1 copy is enough, regardless of the point value, like Hyper Librarian. It seems rare that you would make 2, maybe in like some fancy FTKs. But especially in Genesis where you can't link off an extra one to clear a clogged field, it's a little bit of a risk. Okay, if you made it this far, or if you clicked any of the links in the description and then just skipped the whole video, I hope you found this little research project useful. I genuinely find Genesis deck building so fun and so rewarding, so if you want me to take a stab at a list of your favorite pet deck, just let me know down in the comments. I'll do it. So far, I have built things like Sprite Melfi, Clown Crew True Draco, Fire Kings, Goaty, Flu, Metaphys, and I've been tinkering with a few more. And as always, if you like this video or want to see more Genesis content in the future, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks to all of you who watched, and may we get Genesis in Master Duel soon so I can stop using Nexus, which recently deleted all of my Genesis decks and I had to rebuild them. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.